Here at the spaceport that never sleeps, SpaceX has not only been launching a ton, per usual, but there's also been some strange hardware movement that could potentially be related to Starship. Blue Origin continues to prepare for New Glenn's debut flight in the coming months, and we'll also be looking at the aftermath of Hurricane Milton across both the KSC and the Cape. Howdy everybody, my name is Max Evans with NSF, and all of that is coming up and more on this month's Space Coast Flyover.
We are ready for takeoff and departure.
As usual, I'm not alone in this episode, as we'll have Adrian and Ryan alongside to talk about all the ins and outs of the world's busiest spaceport. But first, let's head over to Roberts Road because there is a lot to talk about. Right from the start, the construction of a new tent caught our eye as we were flying overhead.
There's a structure going up. That's looks like a temporary tent.
This new tent is going up right in the footprints of where SpaceX had built the segments for Space Launch Complex 40's new crew access tower. Once complete, the tent will extend south nearer to where they had built the foundations for what was going to be their Florida Mega Bay. RIP. Now, this is not some kind of small, rinky-dinky tent. It's actually huge. With some help from Google Maps, we can estimate that this tent is about 40 meters wide and 140 meters long, or 130 by 460 feet. To put that into context, that should easily fit an entire Starship stack horizontally. So that then poses the question, why? What would SpaceX need such a huge tent for here in Florida? I mean, after all, they already have Hangar X for refurbishment and processing of Falcon boosters and fairings, on top of Hangar X2, which is used for Starlink integration on Falcon fairings, Dragon processing, and Starship heat shield manufacturing. Usually when it comes to SpaceX and knocking up a building, they're up to something big, like Starship. We can all look back on the famous production tents at Starbase. To put this new tent in perspective, it would be about the same width as those old tents, but 30 to 40% longer. It is also about the same width, but 20 meters longer than the big receiving and processing tent that SpaceX has at Sanchez. TLDR, they mean business. Will it be for Starship? Who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. But what we do know, however, is that Elon wants Starship to start flying from Florida next year. And if that's the case, there's a lot to catch up on in terms of launch and support infrastructure. 2025 is coming up real fast, y'all. A tent like this could be used for a variety of purposes, from building and storing Starship and booster barrel sections, new orbital launch mount components for construction. The list goes on and on. But on the other hand, a bit of progress that we would need to see soon is the expansion of Roberts Road to the north. SpaceX already started paperwork for this expansion back in 2022. And over the last year and a half or so, it's received a number of approvals. Some paperwork that was recently released outlined how the first phase of this expansion should look. This map shows how this area will be paved, graded, and drained. I mean, it's literally called paving, grading, and drainage. As you can see, SpaceX plans for this first phase of the north expansion to feature a paved area of 42.77 acres of land. That's a lot of land for just the first phase of expansion. To put it in perspective, SpaceX's Star Factory at Starbase has an area of about 23 acres, which means that the Roberts Road expansion contains nearly twice as much land as their Starbase facility. Twice. So in theory, that means that the first phase of this north expansion at Roberts Road could fit the entirety of the production site at Starbase. And this is just the first phase.
Get a nice wide shot of where Gigabay expansion is going to be?
Yep.
Someday.
This new paved area will also include an entrance from the east, connecting to the Northeast A Avenue running north-south along the facility. Following the south, there will be two paved entrances connecting to the current Roberts Road complex. And as if things weren't already, things are about to get a lot more interesting. Since our last flyover, SpaceX has moved the two excavators from the south side of Roberts Road all the way to the north, where one of these two paved entrances will be in the future. Could this be us perhaps being paranoid and trying to will these changes into reality? Possibly. But with SpaceX's rapid pace, you never know when the action may kick off again. On a similar note, SpaceX has also returned the steel supports that it used to build the second tower at Starbase back to Roberts Road. For those unfamiliar, 7 of the 9 sections of that tower were built right here in Florida and then barged all the way to Starbase. Each of these tower sections was built using one of these 4 pedestals to aid their construction and their transport. So it makes sense to have them back now, with the second tower being built in Starbase and at least 1 more tower to be built here at 39A and 1 more at the Cape. Wink wink, nudge nudge. Curiously though, they've been anchored back on the ground in the same places they were in when the second Starbase tower was built here. We can zoom in and see where the labels have been placed with a module number like Module 1, Module 2, and so on. So with these pedestals being returned and anchored to the ground, could the next tower's construction start soon? We sure hope so, but of course, time will tell. We at least know that on the environmental impact statement for Launch Complex 39A, SpaceX proposed to build a new tower at the site to be used solely for catching Starship vehicles. SpaceX is also in the process of getting an environmental approval for another Starship launch site at the former home of the Delta IV family, Space Launch Complex 37. So taking that into account, we're expecting them to need 2 more towers, at least, in the not so distant future. But what do you think? Are we close to SpaceX resuming Starship activity in Florida? Let us know in the comments section down below. Before moving on from Roberts Road, I should also mention that we've seen some more progress on that small extension of the Hangar X building that we talked about on our last flyover. It looks like SpaceX is already putting up the roof and wall paneling. Whew! I told you there was a lot. All right, now with that out of the way, I'm gonna hand it over to Adrian for the latest on what's happening with Blue Origin and what they're up to.
Let's start our journey this week at Launch Complex 36. Last time we were looking for signs of New Glenn's first stage for the rocket's maiden flight. And spoiler alert, that is still the case, which you can clearly see here as there's clearly no rocket on the pad. Yet. Blue Origin, however, has reported that all 7 BE-4 engines are now installed on the New Glenn first stage, so you're telling me there's a chance in preparation for testing. So we might be very close to finally seeing this mighty rocket booster rolling out to the pad and performing testing, up and including a static fire test. In the fashion of big rockets lately, we are also tracking regulatory factors for this flight. This time we got an update thanks to Christian Davenport from the Washington Post. He is saying, in reaction to New Glenn receiving its engines, from what I hear, there is good progress towards getting an FAA launch license, but getting it in time for November launch would be tight. So, some items open apparently. Blue Origin CEO David Lim commented on the booster receiving its engines. Great job by the engineering, operations and engine teams on the installation. The 7 BE-4 engines in this image will deliver more than 3.8 million pounds of thrust for New Glenn. 3 of these 7 engines gimbal to provide the control authority for New Glenn during ascent, re-entry and landing on Jacqueline, our recovery vessel downrange at sea. Fun fact, the vehicle's max design gimbal condition is during ascent when it has to fight high altitude winds. We saw these gimbal conditions during ascent lately with the Vulcan CERT-2 mission, which saw a failure of a SRB nozzle, which the 2 BE-4 engines on Vulcan corrected masterfully. So we might look at a maiden launch of the New Glenn rocket in late November or early December, only time will tell. But with engines on a booster, it seems we are getting closer and closer indeed. Stay tuned to our socials and Space Coast Live for updates, as we'll be sure to bring you the best views we can get when the booster rolls out. Regarding the second stage, we can see the Mini TE, the second stage test stand, is next to and outside the hangar. It is no longer being worked with in the hangar, which could indicate that second stage testing is done for now, and its focus on the booster going forward. Okay, let's move to Exploration Park. Here we actually saw some damage from Hurricane Milton, which recently passed the Cape, and caused levels of destruction at all kinds of different facilities.
Aw, that poor structure.
Which one?
The one right there that got blown over in the hurricane. All that crumpled steel on the ground, that was a structure.
Oh.
You can see it at the construction of the storage building, which fell over during Hurricane Milton. That's some hefty damage that will take some time to repair, as the structure is basically back at zero from the previous progress. Unfortunately, the structure also fell on some lifts and other equipment, but of course the most important thing is that everyone seems to be okay. The good news though, next to that, Lunar Plant 1, where Blue Origin will be producing its lunar landers, seems to be relatively fine. Of course, with smaller damage it is always hard to tell, but at least the main structure seems to be intact and was actually seeing active work as we flew by. Besides that, it seems in general most of the buildings seem to be relatively unharmed and no damage seems to be done to the other main campus buildings. Of course, Hurricane Milton resulted in a downtime, which means the usual big steps in progress are a bit smaller than usual. For example, the 2CAT, the second stage cleaning and testing facility, is still empty after the recent rut and damage to the building, and it seems Blue did not really advance the repair to prepare a return on testing anytime soon. One interesting note that popped up while we were making this video is that Blue are going to be expanding the composite section of their main factory building. We don't have too much information just yet, but this is likely related to fairing production and shows Blue's ambition to have a high flight rate for New Glenn. What we also saw is some progress in the parking garage. That building is almost finished and seems to be close to operational. We love parking garages tracking here at NSF, so let's hope this also gets a sick decal just as the one in Boca.
That new clearing is definitely more defined over here.
Which one? Oh, that one?
South side of Blue.
The ground for the spin form facility is also now seeing preparation for the foundation. You can see it here where the ground is brown, exactly where the footprint of that factory is planned. And further ground preparation is on the way at the southern expansion, where Blue will continue to expand its already sprawling facilities at the Cape. And of course, we are not complaining about that. Well, that's it for Blue for this month, but with Hurricane gone, they will be busy in the next few weeks, especially with New Glenn's first launch moving closer day by day.
Let's head back to the port, do our thing.
Since our last flyover, Blue Origin has moved Jacqueline, the drone ship it'll use to land the New Glenn first stage, out of Port Canaveral, and it's now in Jacksonville. This is weird because based on a recent communications permit with the Federal Communications Commission, the company had planned to perform more testing with this vessel and New Glenn hardware out at sea. With the landing platform situated in Jacksonville, this brings the schedule for the additional testing and when the barge might be ready to support a New Glenn booster landing into question. It does add to all the other uncertainties that Adrian mentioned earlier, doesn't it? Now, while Jacqueline may no longer be at Port Canaveral for now, SpaceX did have one of its two East Coast drone ships at port when our team flew over the Space Coast. Just read the instructions and ferrying recovery vessel Go Cosmos were both docked with Falcon 9 booster B1076 sitting on the booster stand. This booster had supported the recent Starlink Group 819 mission and it was being processed for transport back to Hangar X, where it will undergo refurbishment for its next flight. In the time between flying and writing, Just Read the Instructions is headed out to sea once again to support another mission, Starlink Group 10-8, and will likely have returned to port by the time this video is released. Such is the pace of SpaceX's launch cadence these days. Now let's take a look at SpaceX's launch pads. Earlier in the episode, Max mentioned potential signs of SpaceX resuming Starship activity here in Florida in the not too distant future. Over the past few months, it appears the company has also been carrying out some minor work on the launch tower at Launch Complex 39A, particularly around the base. We already mentioned in our last Space Coast flyover, but SpaceX has been fortifying the trenches for the commodities that will supply the tower. Following Hurricane Milton, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, conducted an aerial survey to assess the damage the hurricane inflicted upon the spaceport. These images were recently published, providing a much clearer view of the work on those commodity trenches. One detail visible both in these images and in our flyover footage is the addition of new stairs at the rear of the tower's base, along with extra handrails. Why they've only now installed these rather than earlier remains a mystery. It does make one wonder though, if they had the time to install these additions, then why not also begin constructing the other planned installations like the new flame trench or the tank farm that was left unfinished in 2022. Another change we've noticed is that SpaceX appears to have introduced the same white flashing lights on this tower as those we've grown accustomed to seeing on the original Starbase launch tower. These strobe lights are an aviation obstruction light used to alert aviators to the presence of a structure tall enough to pose a potential hazard to navigation. While we haven't observed them in action every single night, it appears that SpaceX is combining them with blinking red lights. They're certainly not going to be easy on the eyes, although that's kind of the point. In the meantime, SpaceX continues to launch Falcon rockets left, right and centre. During our last flyover, the company was preparing Launch Complex 39A for the launch of Europa Clipper on a Falcon Heavy, and right on the heels of that, teams have already reconfigured the Falcon Transporter Erector for the next launch from here, which will be the Cargo Dragon CRS-31 mission. By the way, that Falcon Heavy launch, Europa Clipper, had to navigate around Hurricane Milton, and it appears that the storm may have caused damage to the tent situated west of the main ramp at the pad. During our last flyover, this tent looked good as new, but in our most recent flyover and in the NOAA survey images, it appears damaged and quite torn up. We're not certain what this tent was being used for, but it certainly doesn't appear that SpaceX is in any rush to repair or reassemble it. During this flyover, work was also underway at Space Launch Complex 40, the busiest launch pad in the world, which had just seen the launch of Starlink Group 661. To put this into perspective, the next launch, scheduled to take place by the time you're watching, will mark the 50th launch this year from this site. In 2018, that was like the total number of launches from every single pad in the US combined. This cadence from a single pad is just incredible. The following two busiest launch pads in the world also belong to SpaceX, Space Launch Complex 4 East in Vandenberg with 35 launches and Launch Complex 39A with 18. No other launch pad in the world has recorded more than 10 launches this year, apart from these three. Of course, it's not just SpaceX or Blue Origin doing work out in Florida.
Should be able to see Relativity pretty good from here, yeah?
Yep.
Relativity is also busy preparing Launch Complex 16 for its upcoming Terran R rocket. During our last flyover, we already spotted new tanks that had been installed at the future tank farm for this launch site, and now we've noticed that there are even more present. Thanks to the NOAA survey images, we can also see the piles for the foundation where the massive flame trench will be built to direct the exhaust plume of the 13 Aeon-R engines. We can also see that a drilling rig is being utilised to prepare the grounds for the upcoming hangar for the rocket. It's evident from this view that Terran R will be significantly larger than Terran 1. You can make the comparison yourself, as Relativity has kept the flame trench and hangar used for the smaller rocket intact. At the launch and landing facility area, the Amazon payload processing facility is nearing completion, and proof of that can be seen in the installation of all the fancy logos you'd expect from a building that's about to be finished. The roads surrounding the building have also been paved in asphalt, and there's been additional progress on the nearby structure that will provide extra storage. Also during this flyover, we observed considerable progress on Mobile Launcher 2 for NASA's SLS rocket. It appears that teams are finally assembling the base of the launch tower, which NASA refers to as the Mobile Launcher 2 chair. According to the agency, this component of the launch tower requires 7 different pieces for the entire structure to come together. Once it is fully secured, this will pave the way for teams to install the next major piece of hardware, which will be the first module of the launch tower.
As always, feel free to let us know in the comments what questions you might have for future flights, and to share your thoughts on what may or may not be happening here in the future, such as the possibility of Starship launching from here in 2025. Hey, you never know, weirder things have happened.
I love that we get to do this.
I'm Max Evans with NSF. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.